Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Now on Now for DPM and Service Portfolio Management video. We're going to cover how our ServiceNow team uses DPM to build and maintain their applications and their services with a strong focus on services. So what we really want to do today is highlight the concept of moving towards a service orientation and how we in ServiceNow define and think about services and how you can leverage different tools to create and then visualize and manage those services, namely service portfolio management and digital portfolio management. My name is Caitlin Morse. I'm the ITSM product manager, and I have with me today Aditya. He's going to introduce himself in a little bit. He'll be highlighting all the good stuff that ServiceNow is doing with service portfolio management and DPM today. So with that, let's dive right in. First, we want to talk about a shift to services orientation. So when we talk to customers, we're hearing a lot of stories about moving away from managing individual pieces of technology, like infrastructure, servers, networks, to thinking more about managing end-to-end services. This really helps customers think about or focus on who their end users are, people who are consuming the things that they're managing and delivering. What this does is it helps them better serve their end users and really focus on what outcomes and value is being delivered through those services. It also helps to identify and remove redundancies. So anything that might be, similar, or you're spending money on two things that are doing very similar things, it really helps to reduce a lot of costs. So this kind of gets into our next one around helping to optimize costs within an organization. It also helps customers think a little bit more strategically about how they invest and divest across their portfolio of services. I like to highlight this quote on the right because it shows a particular customer that we spoke to about their evolution, moving more towards services and thinking about delivering, value and what the experience is for that end user. And then also the benefits they get out of really understanding impacts to a person. So yes, that one piece of technology went offline, but who was impacted? How are they impacted? How do we improve our service resilience? Things like that. Really getting a better understanding of what those services are was their starting point. But they struggled with, how do we define services? Really, what is a service? That was their challenge. And so we're going to talk a little bit about how ServiceNow thinks about what a service is. When we look at how ITIL defines a service, it's an outcome that delivers a benefit to an end user or somebody receiving that service. The key is that it's not tied to a specific piece of technology. It's more, what is it that we're doing? What is it that we're providing? Is the value obvious to a non-IT person? That's really critical. Like, does somebody understand what it is, what they're getting? And there are things like services that'll be available to end users, either of a business or external to customers. And then there are services that might be targeted to other service owners or non-IT people. And this kind of gets us into the different types of services that we think about in ServiceNow and that are defined in our Common Services Data Model, or CSDM. When we look at business service, it's tricky to draw a clear line sometimes between business service and technical service, because when you think of business, you might think of something that the business is delivering externally or making money on, and that's certainly an example of it. It can also, though, be a service that is being provided by IT to end users or to other key stakeholders. It's something typically that end users will understand, acknowledge, request, and value out of. Technical services, you can really think about those as something that's more targeted towards service owners, or something that's about managing technology, like people who are maintaining, supporting, ultimately delivering specific set of technology that might enable other business services, or people who are enabling other business services. We could think of a couple of different examples. We have email and calendaring, application hosting, desktop support, network monitoring. These are just some common examples that you find within IT, for example, and it's a combination of business and technical services. And then the other thing that's maybe a little bit more unique to certain organizations, it's this one is, I find, is often the hardest to understand. It's what we're calling a service offering. And that's really important within the context of ServiceNow in particular. because service offerings are critical in our data model. When we think about a service, it's really defined at the level of how it enables the business or how it is used, what outcomes it provides. Whereas the offering is more about the variation of that service. It can be what level of service is being provided to certain people. It could be about where the service is being provided, so different geographies. On the right side of the screen, we highlight some dimensions that you can think about when thinking about a service offering and what would denote a service offering versus a service. The one thing I do also like to think about and discuss is the fact that services should be a little bit more long lasting. This helps you have history so you can see how the service has evolved over time and how you're improving on how it's being provided. And it's also more like responding to technology that becomes available or new expectations from end users. Whereas the offerings are going to be updated, changed, retired, onboarded more routinely. That's like where more the churn is going to happen. So that's another good way to think about it. I like to use this slide as an example to talk a little bit about the concept of service versus offering and the importance of services and thinking about services really instead of individual technology components. At the top here, we're talking about the fact that the service itself is going to be, again, remain consistent. The way that it's provided or the way that it changes over time is going to be based on different things that happen, technology, new advancements in technology, how user expectations are evolving, and perceived value that users get out of it. So when you look at this timeline, this is a simplified version and it's kind of meant to illustrate evolution of service. But when you think about banks, I like to use this example because most of us, if not all of us, right, interact with banks in some way, shape, or form. So when a bank was first established, you took money, physical money into an establishment and you interacted with a person for them to actually take your money and keep it safe for you. And then for you to go and get access to it. If we think about, making those financial deposits, the way you deposited that money into the bank really evolved as different things became available. So we introduced the first drive-up teller. Instead of having to get out, go into the physical bank, you can now stay in your horse and buggy or eventually in your car, and you were able to interact in that way and receive, or the bank was providing the service of deposits based on what people were expecting. We go into ATMs. Now we don't have to actually interact with anybody to deposit money via an ATM. And there's also ATMs now at the drive-through teller. We can shoot the money through the tube, like that kind of stuff. All the way now, if we look further to the right, with the mobile phone and becoming so important and people living more remote lives and being on the go, a lot of, or I should say maybe some banks, right, have actually gone completely remote where they don't have any physical establishments. Things are happening more through computers and on applications. And so when you think about how you're providing a specific service like financial deposits, there's different ways that you provide that service. There's different technology that's required. There's different levels of support or the way that you would support, the way that you would troubleshoot, and then also the way you would provide workarounds. For example, if the mobile application has an issue where users aren't able to log in and actually make their deposit or the deposit isn't going through, a workaround might be, hey, use our website, or you can come into the bank or go to an ATM. And so thinking about services in that way and with the context of that offering, I think this can sort of help illustrate the nuances with the service and offering and how you can think about the services you provide. This is another way to show different types of examples, how you can categorize offerings based on the types of services. And so you can see here we have the technology environment. So this might be more around managing like that technical service offerings, where if you're thinking about something that's how you provide levels of support to end users, you could think about a gold, silver, bronze approach. This is also similar in the example that we just provided with the deposits. Do you have a service that you're providing on web, on mobile, via an application, on a desktop, in that another case, an ATM? Those different kinds of offerings can be built out that way. I always like to say that Creating offerings is definitely more of an art than a science. There's not really a right or wrong way to do it. There's different ways that you can think about it that makes the most sense to how you're structuring your services and understanding that it will evolve. And so it's okay if you don't get it perfect the first time. You can do some trial and error. Okay, so with that context, I'm really excited to pass this over to Aditya. Please introduce yourself, and we're really excited to learn about how you actually took a lot of this content, like this background context, and applied it to our own ServiceNow services.
Thank you, Caitlin, so much for diving into this. So, a quick introduction. My name is Aditya. I'm the product manager for ITSM, internal to ServiceNow, and my role and responsibility includes implementation of all the ServiceNow products. So, let me share my screen real quick. So before we dive into the instance and see how the services are configured, I just want to, give you a little bit more context about how we have started our journey from the CSDM DPM standpoint, right? So this is the data modeling process followed as we moved into creating our enterprise portfolios across all departments, considering IT, finance, legal, and HR. So if you see on the screen, there are a lot of activities which we did internally. The number one thing was to identify what is going to be our approach, an approach in terms of are we going to do entire services taxonomy at one shot, or are we going to divide it into a phased approach? So the identification was let's dive into the journey through phased approach. So number one thing which we did was identify the top critical services across the organization, which will be part of our MVP journey. So as soon as we started determining the approach, we identified the services which we're gonna start off with. We started preparing the data, and gather data is something which was very consistent in terms of talking to all our service owners who owns those services across departments. So we sat with them, we did the working sessions and workshops to understand the services and the offerings which they are basically owned of, and then how they basically deploy those services and offerings to their end users. So this exercise was completed as part of the data gathering process. And once the data gathering was completed, we moved on to the modeling data. And this is where we used Service Builder to construct all the services and offerings and app services which were gathered during the workshops in the gather data process model. After the model data was done in terms of entering those services and offerings using Service Builder onto the platform, we wanted to make sure like all the relationships which are a part of the CSDM relationship model have been configured. So we configured portfolios, we configured services, we configured offerings, and then we just use service mapping to basically relate application services to the core IT infrastructure. And once we enter the entire set of data into the database, we wanted to make sure we are maintaining and using the data on our core ITSM processes. So the data consumption on the ITSM processes was done by maintaining or exposing service offering fields and some other important critical fields on these core process forms. So was like the typical data modeling process, which we followed end to end for getting us up to the speed on CSDM and digital portfolio management. So I'll quickly share my next screen, which will talk about the instance and how the data looks precisely on the instance. So give me 1 second. Okay. So if you see my screen here, this is the digital portfolio management workspace. This is the homepage where if I logged in as myself, I will see what are the services and any business applications which are associated to my profile and I'm the owner of. And this is completely, configurable in terms of you can define your own service portfolios, you can define your personal portfolios. It all depends on a service owner, how much services and offerings they own. The most important thing for us as a service owner in the IT department is how we can see all enterprise portfolios. And if you come to the screen, you will see we have 9 enterprise portfolios, which we have defined for ServiceNow internally. So these are spread across all the departments, basically IT, legal, finance, go-to-market, and DCX and analytics. So all these portfolios are owned by each service owner, each leader at their level, and they can basically drill down into the need and needs of every services and offerings which falls under this specific enterprise portfolios. To start with an example, I'll just go into the operations portfolio, which is majorly being used into ServiceNow. So this is where you will see all our technical and business services, which are very close to the operations portfolio, which is your infrastructure and anything associated to applications and application operations. So if you see on my screen currently, these are all the categories which we defined on the instance in terms of DTO. So all these categories will basically have its own technical or business services, and all those technical and business services will have granular visibility into each offerings. So if I specifically talk about DTO on the view page, you will see a complete snapshot of the entire portfolio. So if I am a leader who is basically managing the entire DT operations portfolio, I will be able to see a quick snapshot of what is happening on my portfolio. And these performance snapshot completely out of the box matrix, which are configured when we installed DPM and Service Builder. So these can be this is all your historical data, which is being used by the performance analytics jobs at the backend. The critical thing when a service owner is going to do the service reviews against their teams, they can basically drill down into each section. So I'll take an example of application operations and a technical service example of SAP system administration. So once you click on SAP system administration, this is, if you see, this is a technical service. And you can see how the technical service performance is, how many incidents are being opened against that service, how many incidents are not updated in the last 5 days. And there are tons of metrics available as part of this workbench. So if you want to basically drill down into a technical service, you will see these are different offerings we have configured under this service. And as Caitlin said before, like this is where you have to define what will be your parent service and what are the offerings this technical service or any business service will have. Once you have a clear understanding of how you want to define your offerings and services, this is how it will be configured and look onto the system. And then as a service owner, you can basically drill down into every service or every offering, or even, see the relationship between your core services against your infrastructure. So if I go into, for an example, view details, here you will basically able to see how the entire operations is being run by our service owner in our production environment. So there are multiple ways you can enable this entire experience. These plan, build, run, and info tabs are completely configurable. So based on the phased approach which you take to implement DPM in your organization, you can enable or disable these options to start with. The typical thing which, as a service owner, most of the service owners are interested in how the health and how the relationships are happening on my environment, like how I can connect my service to my core infrastructure, how I can see the old relationship model. And if something goes down, am I able to identify where is the right impact, right? So if you click on this view relationship, this is like a typical map which will give you end-to-end visibility against your services, against your offering, and all the granular visibility up to each individual infrastructure component. So you can basically go into different levels. So if you want to go to 4 levels down, you can see how this entire relationship map is built based on the CSDM and the service mapping relationship. So this is where, if you see, this is the top service which a service owner is responsible for. These are the multiple offerings, and these are the typical app services which have the infrastructure which is supporting these app services. And if you want to go more detail, you can go as much as you can. And this data is completely coming from the service discovery and the service mapping which you have in your organization. So the beauty of the entire workspace is it basically sets up the relationship between your processes, between your entire core service mindset against what is being supported by your infrastructure. So this is a prime example of, if I'm a service owner, I want to see if tomorrow I'm doing a change on an SAP infrastructure item on this mapping, I can see the upstream impact it is going to cause. And if you go a couple of levels down, you can also see the downstream impact. So this is like a very critical thing in terms of how we are executing our ITSM processes on identifying a risk or what's the impact on a specific CI if something goes wrong or something is happening as an outage in the production environment. Going back to the service, you have the run part. This has been mostly used effectively in ServiceNow internally, because these are the top level KPIs which every service owner tracks in terms of their services and offerings. And this is completely out of the box. It's just you have to configure you have to associate your mappings to the KPI groups, and then you will be able to see all these metrics will be basically popping up all the data which is from your instance. If you want to deep dive into every service and offerings, you can see all the operational matrix here, and you can drill down onto how many incidents are open. And it will basically, you can keep going as detailed as you can if you want to do entire service review against every assignment group, which is supporting or managing this completely application. So this is like typical behavior of our service owners on using digital portfolio management to managing the entire infrastructure which they own basically as part of their day in day out job. So I'll pass it back to Caitlin for this. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Aditya. I think it's best for us to finish with a couple of useful links that will help you find additional resources that you can learn as you're on your journey in different phases of that journey. We have a DPM Academy series. There are a bunch of videos in there that highlight different topics. We also have a Launch and Learn series. There's a community forum where you can ask us questions and you can access other key resources. If you need to create a case, if something's not working for you, or if you're having trouble with anything, this is a link to the Now support. And then you can also use this QR code to access our DPM toolkit, which has, again, additional resources, information to help you on your journey. We will also be providing these links in the description below so that you can easily access any and all of these resources. Thank you so much. We hope you found this useful.